She said it while pouring coffee as if it were an afterthought. No anger, no hesitation, no curiosity about how it might land. You are just emotionally weak. The mug clicked softly against the counter. She did not look up. Her tone held the cold efficiency of someone labeling a file before throwing it out. I watched her stir in almond milk, her movements smooth and deliberate. She had been rehearsing that line, not because she believed it, but because she needed it to be true. If I was weak, then her choices were justified. Her changes, her distance, her evasions, they became reactions instead of decisions. I said nothing. That silence was not surrender. It was inventory. She had delivered the insult during a stretch of artificial calm, no recent arguments, no obvious tension. We had eaten dinner the night before without incident. I had even complimented the new recipe, which she had deflected with a tight smile. She had been patient for weeks, waiting for a cue to strike. That morning she took it. "You barely talk anymore," she added after a pause, still not meeting my eyes. "It feels like you are always somewhere else." I stepped past her and opened the fridge, not for food but for distance. The cold air grounded me. I scanned the shelves absently, aware that this was not about breakfast. "That is not new," I replied. "You noticed it now because you need it to mean something." She paused mid-pour, then gave a short, humorless laugh. "There it is, deflection masked as clarity." She wanted friction, something to point to later, an exchange she could shape into a grievance. But I had no intention of giving her the material. Instead, I closed the fridge and walked into the living room. I sat down on the couch and opened my laptop. If she wanted to label me, she could. But I would not perform the role she had assigned. The rest of the morning unfolded with eerie normalcy. She checked emails on her phone. She took a call about a retreat she had mentioned twice before, both times vaguely, as if testing how closely I listened. I listened closely, I always had. That was what unnerved her the most. By noon, she had left for what she described as a meeting with a potential collaborator. She had named the person, Alicia something, and added that it would probably run long. Her voice carried the exact amount of casual detail that made the story seem real. But I had already seen the name Alicia referenced twice in her email drafts, both times in the context of a mental health framework proposal she had claimed to be co-developing. Except Alicia was not a practitioner. She was a branding consultant. I had learned that by looking up the LLC Alicia had registered last spring, under a portfolio that included lifestyle packaging, content marketing, and something called emotional narrative architecture. She was preparing something. A shift in the story, one where she was the person trying to grow and I was the one holding her back. That afternoon, I reviewed my digital security logs. 2 days earlier, someone had accessed one of my cloud folders, an archived set of performance reviews from my firm's early restructuring phase. Nothing sensitive, nothing damaging, but it was a test probe. The IP address matched a location tied to a co-working space uptown. She had visited that space once for a panel on resilience in post-foundation partnerships. Her words, "The pattern was beginning to form. She was building a case. A version of reality where my quiet was not strategy but instability, where my restraint would look like repression, where my hesitation would be painted as emotional volatility." I made no changes to my behavior. I continued our routines exactly as before: meals, errands, shared calendar updates. She would not know I had noticed. That evening she returned with that same calculated calm. Her coat hung precisely on the rack. She brushed my shoulder lightly as she passed, offered a faint smile, and asked what we should do for dinner. "Whatever you feel like," I said. "You decide." Her smile flickered, then returned. She liked control wrapped as choice. As she opened the fridge, she said it again. Not the insult, but the replacement narrative. "You should talk to someone," she said. "It might help. You hold so much in." I watched her from the threshold of the kitchen, my arms folded. "What would I say?" I asked. "That I am confused by the person standing in front of me." She kept her face neutral. "That you want to understand yourself better." That was not concern, that was positioning, and I had heard enough. I waited until she went upstairs before opening the file I had begun assembling 3 months earlier: notes, calendar inconsistencies, contact shifts, subtle language variations in her email drafts. I added today's insult as a new entry, not because it wounded me but because it signaled what came next. She had labeled me emotionally weak. But that label was her own foundation cracking, and I was going to let it collapse quietly, cleanly, without warning. The next day she left a list of helpful suggestions on the counter. Not a to-do list, not errands, just observations disguised as concern, printed in soft blue ink on the kind of stationery she used for holiday cards. You should journal more, or consider a retreat. A few days away might clear your head. Each line read like advice, but the subtext was clinical. It was the language used by people preparing to redefine someone else's baseline. I read it twice, folded the paper once, and slid it into the side drawer where I kept warranty receipts. Not because it mattered yet, but because later it might. At lunch, I sat in my office and reread an internal memo she had sent 2 months earlier on behalf of our business development arm. She had signed it as strategic advisor. That role did not exist, at least not for her. I had never given her title access, only visibility into shared planning folders. That afternoon, I confirmed with HR that her credentials had been upgraded using my old administrator key. She had used it once for a payroll fix. I never reset it. That was my mistake. I sat still for a moment after the call ended, then made one quiet move. I created a secondary profile under a non-identifiable alias, something that would allow me to track access in real time. By evening, she was home early and cheerful. She played a jazz playlist she knew I liked but had not touched in years. She chopped vegetables with curated ease, sipping from a glass of white wine and humming softly. "You have been more grounded lately," she said as I passed her in the kitchen. I opened the cabinet without answering. She watched me, head tilted slightly. "You feel more centered." "That is good to hear," I replied. She smiled. "Maybe you are turning a corner." She said it with the tone of someone watching a recovery they had staged. It was a line designed to document progress that made her look insightful and me look unstable. After dinner, she suggested we watch something together. I agreed. Not out of sentiment, out of strategy. As the show played, she nestled closer, resting her head on my shoulder like nothing had shifted between us. Her hand curled around my wrist and she whispered, "I missed this." I let the silence stretch. When she finally pulled back to look at me, her eyes were soft, rehearsed. "Are you happy tonight?" I met her gaze. "I am observing," she laughed lightly. "That sounds clinical," I nodded. "Maybe." She returned to her position beside me and said nothing more. The next morning, I received a message from a former colleague I had not spoken to in over a year. He asked if everything was all right. His tone was gentle, but something in the way he worded it felt rehearsed. I asked him directly if he had heard anything. He hesitated. Then he replied, "Only that you are taking some time to process things, that you are going through something." I asked where he had heard it. His reply came quickly. "Not important. I just wanted to say I am around if you need to talk." That phrase, "going through something," was hers. She used it with people when she wanted to sound caring but detached. It implied illness without claiming it. It implied burden without blame. She was spreading it slowly, not as a rumor but as a lens. She was building a narrative in which I was not broken but fragile, not dishonest but uncertain. And she was the one gently weathering it beside me. I let the message sit for a while before replying. "Thanks, I appreciate you checking in." I said nothing more, because every sentence she released was a quiet signal and I was already mapping them. That afternoon, I reviewed our shared health insurance login. She had added 2 consultations in the last quarter. One was with a provider listed under psychological support services. I called the number, asked if she had completed her intake. The receptionist said no. She requested records, not a session. That told me more than I expected. She did not want help. She wanted documentation, something official, something she could cite later if asked about her concern, something that made her look responsible for a condition she was trying to assign to me. By nightfall, she had reset the living room with new candles and a throw blanket we had not used in over a year. She dimmed the lights and turned on the fireplace display. She poured 2 glasses of wine and waited until I sat down. "I think we are getting better," she said, her voice soft. "I feel closer to you now than I have in months." I took a sip, then looked at her. "That is encouraging," she smiled. "It is about time." I leaned forward and asked the question carefully. "Have you told anyone we were struggling?" Her smile faltered slightly, then returned. "No one that matters, just people who asked." "And what did you say?" She looked down at her glass. "That you were having a hard time, that I was trying to support you." There it was, the architecture of her angle, framed care, strategic vulnerability. She did not say I was cruel, she said I was weak. She did not accuse me of wrongdoing, she implied I was unwell, and she had done it early, quietly, with enough softness to sound noble. I let her think I was moved. I thanked her. She touched my hand lightly. "I am on your side, always," I nodded, because I needed her to believe it, until I had every piece. 2 days later her tone shifted again, not colder, lighter, almost relieved, as if she had already filed away my profile into a new category, one she did not expect me to escape from. We were sitting at the table after dinner, a half-finished salad between us. She pushed her plate slightly away and rested her chin in one hand. "You know," she said, her voice quiet but deliberate, "you should consider writing about this, everything you are going through." "I think it would help." I met her eyes. "What exactly do you think I am going through?" She gave a soft shrug. "Just everything, the pressure, your mood lately, the way you shut down." Her words were gentle, her expression was clean, but the implication was exact. She was naming a condition without diagnosis, framing a pattern without evidence, and if I resisted, it would validate her script. I did not resist. Instead, I reached for my water and said, "That is a generous suggestion." She smiled, pleased by my compliance. Later that night she placed a small stack of articles on my desk, printed not emailed, titles underlined. Most were about trauma management, executive fatigue, psychological resilience. One was from a journal I recognized, used often in custody disputes where mental clarity was under review. I read each one, not for content but for purpose. These were not shared out of care. They were left as breadcrumbs. She wanted to build a paper trail of early interventions. The next morning, I opened our home printer's recent job history. The articles had been printed at 11:43 p.m. 2 nights earlier, after she had said goodnight and pretended to sleep. That afternoon, I contacted a personal legal advisor, not my corporate counsel, but someone unconnected to our mutual assets. I outlined the basics, presented no accusations, and requested two things: baseline psychological evaluations for myself, sealed, and a notarized declaration of cognitive capacity, predated with no mention of marital status. "Preventive positioning," I said. The attorney's reply was calm. "Smart. If she is building a soft claim, it will be dressed as concern." I nodded. "It already is." He scheduled the appointments, quietly, privately. No shared records. When I returned home, she was sitting on the patio, feet tucked beneath her, reading a novel she had never touched in the 10 years I had known her. It was by a therapist author known for framing relationship breakdowns as trauma cycles. She smiled when I stepped outside. "This book is helping me understand you better." I nodded once. "That is kind." She tilted her head slightly. "Do you think I am trying too hard?" I sat across from her. "I think you are preparing something." The moment hung still for half a second, then she laughed. "Well, that is one way to say thank you." Her smile held. I smiled back. That evening she suggested a short getaway. "Nothing big," she said, refilling my glass. "Just a cabin upstate, a little reset." I watched her carefully. "For us?" She hesitated, then said, "For you, you need space, no expectations, just time to reflect." There it was again, language dressed as empathy, but the context was logistical. She wanted distance, but she wanted it documented as healing time. If she moved assets, altered contracts, or began filing anything during the retreat, she would point back to this offer as proof she had tried to help. "I will consider it," I said. She touched my shoulder lightly. "Let me know. I want you to feel strong again." The next morning, I reviewed our joint email log, an old system we used for scheduling. She had recently removed several entries labeled Shared Prep R. I checked the archive. R stood for a consulting firm she had once claimed to collaborate with years ago. I traced it. It no longer existed. But a new LLC with a similar name had been registered 4 months ago. Registered agent, Alicia. Same branding consultant who was never a therapist. I reviewed the firm's public site. Services offered: narrative development, lifestyle repositioning, support document creation, and legal support content coordination. It was not a wellness firm. It was a narrative asset consultancy. One designed to help someone build a version of reality in which they were the supportive spouse trying to reach a partner who was emotionally distant, mentally strained, and incapable of shared growth. And she had already begun that draft. I printed every version of the now deleted entries. I saved metadata, I logged access trails. By that night she was making tea for both of us, lavender, calming. She set mine down gently, then sat across from me and placed a soft hand over mine. "I know this has been hard," she said, eyes warm. "I want you to know I am not giving up on us." I looked at her hand on mine, then up at her. "I appreciate that, because I needed her to keep believing I was the version she had constructed, until I could dismantle it on record in silence with proof." 3 days later, she staged a moment in public. We were at a mutual friend's birthday dinner, casual, intimate, hosted in a quiet rooftop lounge. She made sure we arrived last. That let her walk in already composed, already holding the performance in place. She greeted everyone warmly, paused just long enough to rest her hand on my back, and said in a clear, affectionate tone, "He has been through so much lately, but he is finding his way again." I did not flinch. I watched the ripple of polite concern move through the faces around us. No one asked what she meant. That was the brilliance of it. She did not define so much. She let the silence do the work. Let ambiguity stitch the story together. Later in the evening, she pulled the hostess aside and spoke in hushed tones. I watched the way the hostess's expression softened, then tightened, then shifted to concern as she glanced once in my direction. I knew what had been said. Not that I was unstable, not dangerous, that would be too obvious, but that I was trying, that I had lost some footing, that I was working through some unresolved internal things. It was the kind of story you cannot correct without sounding defensive. The kind that sounds most believable when the accused says nothing. So I said nothing. On the way home, she reached for my hand in the car. "I think that went really well," she said. Her voice was light, deliberate. I nodded. "It did." She squeezed my fingers. "Everyone seems to really care about you." I turned slightly, studying her profile. "That is good to know." She smiled at the windshield. "You deserve that." At home, I stepped into the guest room where I had begun working late into the night. She assumed it was stress. She had even recommended that I use the space to get some clarity. That evening, I opened a sealed envelope from my advisor. Inside were the results of my baseline evaluation. Balanced, stable, no red flags. The documents were notarized and time-stamped. I scanned and encrypted them twice. Then I stored a hard copy in a locked drawer she never touched, an old file cabinet where I once kept tax records. She came to the door 15 minutes later with a warm mug in hand. "Chamomile," she said. "Thought you could use something grounding." I took the mug and thanked her. She lingered in the doorway, watching me. "Do you ever wonder how we got here?" she asked softly. I set the mug down. "Sometimes." "I miss us," she said. "The version of us before everything got heavy." "What version was that?" She blinked once. "When you used to laugh without hesitation." I let the silence hold. Then I said, "You are building a case." Her face shifted just slightly. Not alarm, not anger, just calculation. She stepped into the room and sat on the edge of the guest bed. "I am trying to help you," she said. "You have not been yourself, and you will not talk to anyone. You keep pulling away." I folded my hands in my lap. "And you decided to manage the narrative for me." She did not respond at first. Her eyes dropped to the floor, then back up. "You needed protection, even if you did not ask for it." That line was rehearsed. I could hear the structure of it. She had tried it before, maybe in a draft email, maybe in front of a mirror, maybe in a session with Alicia. I stood and walked to the door, letting the silence stretch long enough for her to stand too. She touched my arm gently. "I still believe in us, but you have to let someone in." I nodded once. "I already have." That night, after she had fallen asleep, I reviewed her most recent bank statements. There was a transaction for transitional planning services processed under a business name I had flagged earlier. The payment was broken into two portions, one for strategic content development and one for supportive client representation preparation. The wording was precise, sanitized, legal adjacent. She was not preparing to step away. She was preparing to reframe everything: the roles, the perception of control. I logged the transaction, archived the metadata, matched it to the date of the article she had printed. In the morning, she served breakfast with a bright, hopeful smile. She added cinnamon to the coffee, something she had not done in years. "Smell that?" she asked as she handed me the mug. "Smells like things turning around," I sipped. "Smells like preparation." Her smile faltered just enough for me to know she heard it the right way. She recovered quickly. "That is not fair." I looked at her calmly. "Neither is redesigning the facts." She said nothing else. She took a bite of toast, then glanced at the window like the light had suddenly changed, because it had. The version of me she thought she was documenting had just stood up, and the man in front of her was not confused. He was recording everything, quietly, legally, unmistakably. 2 days passed without conflict. She played the role of calm partner with renewed precision, asking about my projects, suggesting we go out for dinner, offering to run errands I usually handled. It was not reconciliation, it was theater, designed not for me but for her growing list of potential observers. That Thursday she brought home a manila envelope and set it beside my laptop without a word. Her expression was light. Her eyes stayed too still. "I spoke with someone," she said, removing her coat. "Not legal, just a guide. Someone who helps couples get back on track when one person is feeling stuck." She moved into the kitchen as she spoke, voice casual, volume just loud enough to carry. She wanted me to know it was not a secret. She wanted it to feel generous. I opened the envelope after she went upstairs. Inside were 3 printed documents, an intake questionnaire, a brochure labeled Mutual Stability and Emotional Reframing, and a typed outline titled Crisis Narrative Reorganization. The language was clean, vague. Phrases like perceived withdrawal, unmet emotional labor, and codependency patterns in high-performing dynamics. Not one mention of actual conflict, no admission of duplicity, just a roadmap for how to shape the story moving forward. On page 3, I found a line that stopped me cold. Partner is encouraged to acknowledge behavioral disruptions and seek affirmational closure for destabilizing episodes. Behavioral disruptions, affirmational closure. She was preparing to define my silence as volatility, my restraint as dysfunction, and if I refused to engage on her terms, it would be noted as resistance, not clarity. I made a copy of the packet, logged it, then returned it to the envelope and left it untouched on the desk. That night over dinner, she asked if I had reviewed it. I said yes. She smiled. "I think this is the kind of support we need, something structured, neutral." I met her eyes across the table. "Who referred you to this?" She stirred her risotto with deliberate focus. "Alicia, she knows someone who has worked with high-conflict transitions." "And what did you tell Alicia we were transitioning from?" She looked up sharply. "That we were stuck," I nodded once. "And how did she describe me?" She set her fork down. "She did not, I did." I let the silence hang between us, not angry, not confrontational, just long enough for her to feel its weight. She folded her napkin slowly. "I am not attacking you. I'm trying to make sense of what this has become." "And what is that?" I asked. She hesitated. "A cycle. You withdraw, I react. You get colder, I try harder." That line was not hers. It was scripted. A diagnostic loop designed to shift attention. She was not describing me. She was laying the foundation for someone else's evaluation. I leaned back. "You are shaping a careful narrative." Her voice stayed steady. "I am building understanding." "No," I said, tone even. "You are writing a version where I am unwell and you are the witness, not the cause." Her breath caught for a moment, barely noticeable, but real. She looked down at her plate. "I do not want to fight." "This is not a fight," I said. "This is you placing foundation stones beneath a narrative you intend to present later. Framed concern, documented offers of help, proof that you tried." She stood slowly, carried her plate to the sink, and ran water without turning back toward me. "You always think there is an angle." "Because there is," I said, "and I am tracking it." She turned then, her face unreadable. "What are you trying to do?" "I am preparing to make my own version clear," I said, "because if you are collecting documents to prove you cared, I need to be ready to show what you cared about most was positioning." She watched me in silence for a long moment, then said softly, "That sounds paranoid." "It sounds prepared." She left the kitchen without another word. That night I returned to my locked drawer and added the day's date to the log. The following morning she suggested we take a walk. She wore the gray sweater I had once complimented, paired with soft denim and white sneakers she only used when she wanted to look effortlessly composed. We walked 4 blocks in silence before she spoke. "You have been tracking me," she said quietly. "I can feel it." I did not deny it. "And you have been documenting me." She nodded. So what happens now? I stopped walking. Now we find out who finishes their draft first. She met my gaze for a long moment. Then she smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly, because we both understood what this had become. Not a marriage, not a rupture, a competing account. Two people writing the same story from opposite ends. And I was no longer going to let hers be the only version left standing. She became cautious after that walk, not withdrawn, measured. Her touches were fewer, her conversations more directed. She spoke in soft phrases that would sound safe if repeated. Questions like, "Have you been resting enough?" And "Do you ever feel overwhelmed at work?" She framed concern like scaffolding, erected not to support me, but to structure her version of who I had become. She knew I had caught up. She just did not know how far ahead I was. That week, I scheduled a quiet lunch with an estate strategist I had worked with years earlier, someone disconnected from our current legal and financial threads. I did not discuss divorce. I did not discuss separation. I discussed narrative protection. I asked how to prepare for a version of events I never intended to live but now had to document against. His answer was simple. Counter-narrative is not what wins. Clarity does. I gave him what I had: timelines, language patterns, soft manipulations, and public seeds she had already planted. He asked one question that reshaped my plan. Has she attempted to escalate using third-party influence? I paused. Only indirectly. Then you have a window, he said, but not for long. That night she lit candles in the living room again. Soft music played, she poured us both a drink and sat beside me on the couch, legs tucked beneath her. I think I have not been fair, she said quietly. I watched her expression, calm, practiced. She had rehearsed this. I keep trying to fix things, she continued, but maybe I am just making it worse. I took a slow sip before answering. By creating a record of my supposed decline, she did not flinch. I thought it was care. It was insurance, I said. She looked away for a moment, then back. Is that really how you see me now? I see the version you are building. I have read your draft. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Her voice lowered. I was scared. You stopped reaching. You stepped back first, I said, then built a structure to make it look like I was collapsing. She shook her head slowly. I never wanted to hurt you. That part is true, I said. You just wanted to protect your version of the story. We sat in silence. Then she stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the empty street below. I do not know what you want from me now, she said. I want nothing, I replied, which is what scares you, because she had always counted on resistance. On pleading, anger, or fatigue. Something she could point to. Something that proved I was unraveling. But I had removed emotion from the table. I had placed evidence there instead. 3 days later, she made a mistake. She sent an email to her narrative consultant, Alicia's firm, with a subject line that read "finalized version/marital sequence." She blind copied it to an address she did not realize was no longer secure. She had forgotten I once built that inbox for a joint project, one she had abandoned when she changed directions. I still had access. The contents of the email were damning. Not legally, she was careful with her language, but structurally. She detailed a timeline of my withdrawal that did not match the dates she had previously claimed. She referenced emotional unpredictability that contradicted her own text threads. She submitted audio notes that were edited, cut mid-sentence, paused after my long silences to imply tension that never existed. She was not just trying to share her perspective. She was shaping a version of reality that did not match what actually happened. I compiled the email, the metadata, the editing logs. That night, I handed her a folder as we sat across from each other at the dining table. Her fingers hesitated before opening it. Inside were the raw files she had sent. She looked up. You went through I did not need to, I said. You left the door open. Her voice dropped. This is not what it looks like. It looks like a script written for a version of me you never had to confront. She pushed the folder aside. You do not understand. I understand more than you hoped, I said, and now I have the record to prove it. She stood abruptly. What do you want, payback? No, I said calmly. I need you to stop shaping a version of me that never reflected who I truly am. She froze, because she knew what I meant. This was no longer about recovery. It was about authorship, and I had reclaimed the pen. She did not speak to me for 2 days, not out of rage, out of strategy reset. She was regrouping, recalibrating the tone of her next move. I had seen this pattern before in boardrooms. When a proposal was rejected mid-pitch, the presenter would not argue. They would smile, regroup, and return with a softer narrative, more persuasive, less obvious. On the third day, she broke the silence with an apology. "I was trying to feel in control," she said, standing in the doorway of my office. Her voice was quiet, intentional. "Everything was slipping. You were slipping away." She stepped forward slightly, hands at her sides. "I wanted to feel safe. I kept my expression neutral. By making me look unsafe," her eyes held mine. "I needed to believe I could survive if this ended." That was the closest she had come to honesty, and it was not nothing, but it was not enough. That evening, I received an encrypted message from the estate strategist. It contained a letter from a professional mediator who had been approached, anonymously, about a partner who might be emotionally overwhelmed or struggling with clarity. The wording matched her earlier language exactly. The inquiry had not been direct. It had been posed as a question of concerned planning. Not intervention, not accusation, just exploration, but it had been logged, and the inquiry had come from an IP address traced to the Wi-Fi she used at Alicia's co-working firm. I saved the metadata: time, date, packet ID. I sent a summary to my private legal contact with a simple subject line: timeline inversion. 2 hours later, she asked if I would like to reset for a weekend. "No pressure," she said. "Just a getaway." "Quiet space to breathe." I declined. Her shoulders dropped slightly. "You are not even going to try anymore." "I already did," I said, "while you were outlining my decline." She sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded, tone soft. "I am scared," I nodded. "You should be." Because this was no longer about her fear. It was about her accountability. The next morning, I uploaded a secure file to my legal archive. Inside, her mismatched timelines, the raw audio clips she had altered, the narrative consultant's payment logs, the co-working IP packet history, and a full copy of my own psychological baseline. The file was labeled Reconstruction, not as a threat, as truth. That night she came into the living room while I was reading. "I told Alicia we are not moving forward," she said. I looked up. "With what?" Her silence answered for her. She sat across from me, no script this time, no careful phrasing. Just posture and breath. "I thought I was doing what I had to do," she said, "to protect myself." "You were protecting a story," I said, "one that erased mine." She nodded slowly. "And now, you are alone with the version you created," I said, "and you do not believe it either." She leaned forward, voice breaking slightly. "Can we fix this?" I watched her for a long moment. "No," I said, "because the moment you began preparing your story, you stopped believing in the truth." She covered her face with both hands, her body folding in. For the first time in months, I saw something unpracticed, something raw, but I did not move toward her. I stood, walked to the entryway, and picked up the folder she had once left for me, the one about emotional reframing, the one that labeled me disrupted, unstable, in need of clarity. I set it on the table beside her. "Keep this," I said. "You will need to remember how it started." She did not look up. I stepped outside, the air sharp and clean against my face. I did not need to watch her cry, because I had already rebuilt the truth, and I was no longer afraid of what she would try to say. I had written the ending myself, without rage, without collapse, without her permission. She said I was emotionally weak, but in the end she cried alone, and I walked away with nothing but clarity.